So in our profession, the less we write, the better it is, because actually code is a liability. It's like if you take a mortgage and then you come to me, oh, Fabio, I have a mortgage. Yes. Probably you don't want to have a mortgage. You prefer to don't have a mortgage, and because it's a liability. And software is the same. We should write less.
So, Fabio, I saw you posted about mental health for software engineers and how you're doing some chats recently. What's made that stand out to you? Why did you pick, that's something you're going to offer people?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, because I believe that mental health in general, but specifically in our industry, is a bit of a taboo, in the sense that I found during the years that if there are colleagues that maybe they're not happy at work, or that they're facing stress or burning out and all these signals, it's not easy to find someone to go to and talk freely about it. So that's the reason why I believe in 4 years, 5 years ago, I have joined a training for mental first health aid in England, where I learned how to recognize the signal in especially, I mean, these obviously can be applied in any context, right? But mostly I have done it for work reason. Yeah. So essentially, I took this certification, and then I learned about all of these important topics about mental health, depression, even serious things like suicide. Which hopefully you don't ever need to deal with. But yeah, and I guess this is a really good certification that people that manage other people, they should probably take, because it gives you a good tool to be able to understand that in the end, we can be as good as much as we want technically, but in the end we are human, right? So it's really important also to nurture that part of the profession. So that's in a nutshell why I have been into this. I don't know how to call it, this this environment of mental health. Yeah.
Cool. That's really cool that you're doing that. You're right. It's an issue that we have a taboo with, and it's probably going to get worse. With some comments from some of the big tech companies, like we need more masculine energy, and it's probably just going to make things a lot worse in the environment. So we're going to need more people like you that are offering that and doing that. So that's a great thing. Thank you on behalf of the industry, if I'm allowed to speak for the industry, but
Yeah, there are
my
a lot
small
of
part
people.
of it.
Yeah, there are a lot of people. I don't know if you know, probably, and this I will make a name. I think Richard Donovan is another
Yeah.
guy that is very into mental health, and he also helps a lot of people. So reach out to him, look for him. He's also into mental health, and he's also a software engineer. So
Yeah, he's a really nice guy too.
yeah.
Even if he does have a strange obsession with running around. Cool. So you mentioned that this is quite important, and you learned the signals to look out for. So, what are a couple of things that people should look out for, and maybe seek help if they're experiencing them?
Well, very often, as you probably have experienced yourself firsthand, unfortunately, the deadlines for our software project very often are top down, right? So someone tells you, oh, the software needs to be done by this time, right? This is quite recurring problem in our industry, which in my view should not be this way, should probably be the opposite, right? So people that knows technical can make an idea, not a full commitment. But let's say that, as we were discussing before, this is 99 of the software industry thinks and works like that, right? So therefore, people find themselves committed to these dates, and then obviously they try very hard, yeah, to meet them, because obviously in the end of the day, I guess no one wake up in the morning saying, today I'm going to do the worst job in the world. Like, everyone wants to contribute, wants to feel important, wants to feel they're contributing for the right, so, and then people end up really sacrificing their own time, so working overtime, thinking about work outside work. And then essentially, when I noticed this, and obviously I unfortunately I had to deal with this situation in some companies where I worked, and I noticed this signal from people. Then, before the ball explode, is important to take them apart and allow them to vent, to talk, to give a safe space, because that's what I was mentioning in the beginning. What is missing, John, is a safe space to talk. And indeed, have you seen, I published, my post on LinkedIn, say, guys, I'm offering mental health. And believe me that a lot of people, they refrain from doing it because, they are scared, because as I said, it's not normal to go to someone and talk about, I don't like work, I'm stuck, it's too much, so I've noticed this, that very rare to find people that actually already accept the fact that they will talk about it. So the signals are typically when people start working overtime, and then they are stressed, and then you can see that they avoid also working together with other people, because they feel like, oh yeah, I need to finish this task, because also another toxic signal that, unfortunately, again, is also, this is very widespread in our industry, is the idea to assign a task to a person. And I think this is also a problem. Why? Not because assigning a task to someone is per se a problem, but because, in my view, software is a team sport, right? So even, and that's why I'm an advocate for pair programming, because whenever you assign a task and then there is a pair of people, especially maybe if the other pair is in the beginning of their journey, or whatever it is, feeling that there is someone with you, checking on you, giving you ideas, sharing the knowledge is the best way. I think that's why, between other things, pair programming, at least for me, is also a relief. You know what I mean? Because you don't feel this pressure. Oh, I need to work on a task, because in the end, software is not a factory that one person does thing, the other person does that. Even though the industry is shaped in this way a little bit, especially now, with AI, etc., etc. So while if we approach more mob programming, more pair programming, is like, is not one person that in the end, needs to feel all the pressure, but is a team that is delivering value. It's not a single person that has a single task and needs to finish, otherwise, do you know what I mean? Like, what I'm getting
Yeah,
at.
absolutely. Now, I've personally experienced pair programming the first time before I'd ever read about it, before I'd heard of extreme programming. I think even before the book was published. When by accident, this is going back like late 1990s, started a new project. We didn't have enough PCs for all the team at the time. So two of us sat down one PC and started tackling something. And we were just building some requirements capturing software for the team to use for a 3-year project. Like I say, two of us, one PC. Pair programming kind of happened because there wasn't enough computers. But that was so invigorating. We tackled this challenge that neither of us knew how to use Microsoft Access, it was, and VBA. Both came from C programming backgrounds. It was like, okay, how are we going to figure this out? How are we going to do it? And that was one of the most fun projects I worked on, because we were learning something new. We were figuring it out together. We had quite a tight deadline and no idea how to get started. But when you started flagging, when you suffered, when you were stuck, there was this other person there going, oh, I've got an idea. So it felt like a very team effort. It felt a bit like playing sports when you're in a team at school. Like, hey, this is how it's supposed to work. Not I sit in the corner quietly in an office wearing my shirt and tie as you did in those days, banging on the keyboard and then getting stuck. It's like when I flag, there's another guy and he's got some input. When he's slowing down, I've got some input. And then when we're not sure, we can get a bit of paper and sketch and have a discussion and argue about it. And we actually produced in, I think, 3 days what was expected to take 5 weeks. And it was absolutely thrilling. So when I then led Extreme Programming Explained and read about it, it's like, oh, that's what we've done. We did it for different reasons and by accident, but yeah, I can get into that. I can see how that would work. And it was such a positive experience. And as you say, it's a team sport. We can't build software alone.
Yeah, actually, I think now, this, given this question and this story we both told, we can do a little bridge on a topic that I think is very connected to it, and you touch upon it. That is like in person to remote. Okay,
Yeah.
and I would argue that so in the past 6 months, I've been working every day in the office except Fridays. Yeah, and in this team, I was working in mob or pair programming. No one was in the corner doing hacking. Okay, and the as you say, very often when we were stuck or we were like, we don't understand this, that we were going to the whiteboard together, discussing. Other people in the office were, walking around and say, "Oh, well, I understand what you're saying. Let me give my bit." So we've been doing this for 6 months, and the result is that, and obviously we were doing TDD, and we were doing also trunk-based development. So it was a pretty senior team, like very experienced people. Probably this is the most experienced team I've ever worked. I don't want to make names, but like there are two or three people that are very known in LinkedIn as well, that they are very active. So it was really, I could say, probably the dream team, yeah, because we were all believing the same values, all applying them. And if someone asks me why, the result is that we created strong human connection, which now that we are not working anymore, some of them is my best friends, and I'm not saying this just for saying, really best friends, and also, we go to the office every day. It was like, oh, I need to go to the office, I don't want to miss, like this amazing environment of learning together, laughing, be pissed, then go to have lunch together, then after work stay for a beer. So, and I can understand the position of people that say, I have a child, my wife, so, for me, avoiding the commute, I fully understand. I'm not saying that, remote is good for everyone, but I don't see any of this happening. And I mean, before this experience, I worked 5 years remote doing pair programming, because I've been doing pair programming and XP for 5 years now. So, I'm not coming from in person, I'm coming from remote. And I can tell you that there is an enormous difference. Like, even though I was still doing pair programming, I was still doing TDD, remote is not the same. Okay, you can argue, we can use Miro, we can, draw things virtually, but personally, I think there is no comparison between this experience and do the same, but even remote. So, what about you?
I agree. And this is a tension that I feel in that pair programming in person has always been so much better. There's so much more energy. It's just simply easier to pick up a bit of paper, turn to a whiteboard, or have a discussion, or maybe you need a bit of fresh air. Even, and I've done this before, we've both just stood up, gone outside for a walk, or walked to grab a cup and carried on the discussion. And it's because we're enjoying the discussion, but a change of scenery helps with clarifying the thinking. And you don't quite have that energy when you're, staring at the code on a screen, talking to somebody. You either can't see them or there's a tiny little window in the bottom corner. It's just not the same. At the same time, as somebody whose typical commute has been 2 hours each way, I'm really, really glad not to do the commute. So I always feel constant tension that I hope never to do the commute again. But I do miss that in-person pairing. It is so productive. So it's a difficult one, and it's never been as good remote. And nearly all the mob programming I've done has been remote as well, and that has been even worse because it's been mixed teams. So it's been very easy for people to fade into the background and not take part,
Mm,
and it's a lot more work then to kind of involve them without feeling that you're kind of picking on them and saying, "Come on, speak up, get involved." It
yeah.
feels a little bit like you're being a bit bossy and parenting them when they shouldn't need that. We shouldn't need to treat them that way. But it's harder to have that energy, and I think it's harder for you to feel involved if you're remote. I want to take a little pause there, and we should maybe explain to some people what we mean by mob programming, because it's still fairly niche, and a lot of people don't really know what it is and how it works. So, would you mind explaining, Fabio?
Yeah, so in my experience, essentially, mob programming is a practice in which there is no one, no two, but and amount of people obviously is not 30, 40 people, because it would be probably difficult. But like probably a team 7, 10, and essentially there are roles, because we need to remember that whenever we apply these practices, it's not just sitting together and work, which somehow now I see that there is a bit this tendency where I hear people, do you do pair programming? Oh yeah, yeah, we sit together. But it's not just sitting together, guys. It's more than that. It's a structured practice. Okay, so usually I always have with me this Pomodoro timer, which is an egg. Let's call it egg timer. And so it's really about someone is driving, so it's keys on the keyboard. Someone else is behind navigating, right? So it's a bit like rally, probably. I think Martin Fowler of somewhere I've read this explanation of see this as a rally, like the pilot and the co-pilot, essentially, right? Obviously, in a mob, there are a lot of people. It's not only the two of us. So like it is, even as you say, even more challenging, right? To try to make sure that everyone can feel safe, because as I wrote in the post the other day, like the underlying thing is the psychological safety that needs to be in place, right? So therefore, in a mob programming, essentially the mob can decide as a group of people, let's do this, let's do that, without no one leading specifically, like the mob decide, and then the navigator tells to the driver. And actually, I like to call this more fishbowl programming, yeah, because there are a lot of people discussing, then they give back their decision to the navigator, and then the driver is there, listening and applying. And actually, it's funny that you mentioned this, because a couple of years ago, with my good friends, we founded a meetup in person, which is London after COVID. Yeah, it was called Mind Bloom, which essentially was a social technical group where we were doing actually this. We were inviting people over in a bar. We were doing a kata all together, and it was exactly like this. There was like 10, 15 people. Yeah, then there was a driver close to the screen and the navigator, and we practiced this as a group. And it was interesting. It was interesting that we have done this 4 or 5 times. Then unfortunately the place closed down, and one of my friends left UK, so we kind of stopped. But every night we have done this meetup. The same people showed up every time, because they were having a lot of fun, because it was a safe environment where you can collaborate with other people. Don't just sit in the corner. And I mean, you could have sit in the corner and look if that's what you want. No one is going to to deny that. But it was really nice. So to wrap up, that's in my view an explanation of mob programming, essentially. Obviously, my suggestion is to try to apply also TDD, because you need a cycle. You need something that don't work. You want to make enough code to make it work, and then you want to refactor, right? But I mean, I personally don't see. I've never done mob and pair without TDD, to be fair. So I don't know if you have experience without doing those things, but doing pair programming. 'Cause-
No, I haven't done it without TDD either. I'll touch on TDD in a minute if that's okay. Just a little
sure.
bit more mob programming. So,
Yeah.
like I say, the teams that I've done it with, it's predominantly been remote, where a lot of people I've seen talking about it in office have, got a big TV or a big monitor, a whiteboard, and kind of created that environment for it. So, was the office particularly laid out for this? Have you changed things, or were you using
Uh,
fairly standard equipment?
No, actually, I guess we were lucky. Why? Because we were in a big office space where there was like two classic whiteboard, but then we also requested to buy like some digital whiteboards, essentially. So then, when we were in the office, it was always like jumping between big screens and whiteboard. So, and the environment allowed us to do this. But be mindful that even in this context, there were people that they didn't do pair programming. There were people that were not engaging, people that were probably ghost engineer. So you see, like you can have the psychological safety, you can have all the practice we had, extreme programming, time-based development, TDD, and still someone didn't really enjoy doing any of this. So it's a tricky one.
Yeah, and part of that I think is, as you say, the psychological safety. Another part of it is, and this is again a tension I found. Some of us came into this industry because we didn't want to deal with people. It's like, I don't want to deal with people. They're annoying, they're illogical, they're irrational. If I can, like software, I can just sit in the corner with a computer, and the computer, 2 plus 2 is 4. It's consistent. Same thing in, same output. So it's a bit of a reality shock for some of us when we realise that actually software engineering is a social activity. We don't just sit in the corner and churn out code. We have to work with other people, whether it's pair programming, mob programming, talking to a product owner, talking to a customer, capturing requirements, talking to maybe a test team or QA person, or all these things where we have to interact with people, and it is a social activity.
Recently, I've been involved in an interview process for a funk. So I'm not going to say who, obviously, but for a big company that everyone use it every day. And when they asked me, okay, now it's your turn of questions. I asked, okay, guys, so tell me more about pair programming. Do you do any pair programming? And the guys, even though this company publicly shared they do pair programming, so I was expecting them, but obviously it's so big, right, that maybe not all the team are doing it. So this guy told me, well, there is no really mandate to do pair programming, and actually, we do pair programming only when there are the benefit. And I was like, only when there are the benefit inside my mind, like what this guy's telling me. Like I don't see a pair programming session that doesn't have benefit. Like, because as I said, the benefit are so many. Even if you've never done it, you are going to learn. You are going to support emotionally someone else. You are going to also learn the domain itself that you might not know. So, like, I don't see a scenario in which performing doesn't have benefits. And then, funny enough, still last week on one of my posts on this, someone wrote, "Oh, pair programming it will remove the joy of coding because if I need to solve a problem and someone is gonna be with me trying to solve." And I was like, obviously, this is my view. Yeah, I'm not saying I have the truth in my mouth. I'm just saying, I was quite impressed because to me it's the opposite. Like I've never found a pair programming session to be with not benefit, unless once one time happened to me, but this guy was not working, so I was there. This guy was not even looking at the screen. So of course, in this case, pair programming has no benefit. But come on.
Yeah, I mostly agree with you. I guess I have to share one cautionary tale of again early 2000s, first time I led a team. I'd had that great experience pair programming myself. I just led Extreme Programming Explained about a year before. Leading teams like, hey, we should do pair programming. There are all these great benefits. And I've got this junior guy. He needs to learn that domain. I've got this domain expert. They can pair together. The senior guy will share his domain knowledge. He'll teach the junior some better programming practice. It will be great. We'll get all the benefits of pair programming, and it's code review done 100% of the time, and so on. And I'll get all this learning and shared knowledge. It was an absolute mistake, and it was catastrophic. And the key is what you said. It's a psychological safety. I had assumed that we had that in the team because we had a very good environment. I was wrong. So the senior didn't feel it. He felt that he was being undermined and belittled, having to babysit this junior. And he took it out on the junior. And it ended up with junior guy running out of the office in tears and disciplinary action being taken against the senior. And that was my fault for putting people together without having thought about the psychological safety and balanced it. So I had a lot of work then repairing that environment in the office and trying to rebuild that, and I'd made it worse by my over enthusiasm for it. So it's not really a fault of pair programming, it's me misapplying it and bumbling in my first management role. So there's a few cautions there that we should be aware of. Still think that it's the right thing to do, but maybe a little bit less heavy-handed than I did there. But a lot of criticisms we get are, but now I've got 2 people working on 1 bit of code, so I'm going to get half the productivity. So I'm sure we both disagree with that, but let me play devil advocate for a moment and say, well, how do you answer that, Fabio?
The point is, like there are some teams that they put code reviews in place, right? Because they want to, oh yeah, the code needs to be checked, or maybe they do this also, with quality in mind. But we all know that the process of code reviews in the end of the day is very painful because you someone makes a comment and then goes back and then goes. So it's a very long process that very often also the tone used in these comments are kind of wrong tones. So then what I always say to people, if you do pair programming, you're doing code reviews real time all the time, right? So then this really speed up things and also make sure that, I mean, of course, pair programming TDD, all these practices are not bug free. Doesn't mean to write code that is bug free. That's impossible. That doesn't exist, right? But it put in place the condition that allow for sure better understanding and better quality than just one person there, right? So actually, it's again, the problem is if we work in a company or in a team that thinks that developers are typers, yeah, typewriters, then of course, two people to one people go fast, two people slow down. But the problem is that we are not typists in our profession, right? So in our profession, the less we write, the better it is, because actually code is a liability. It's like if you take a mortgage and then you come to me, oh, Fabio, I have a mortgage. Yes. Probably you don't want to have a mortgage. You prefer to don't have a mortgage and because it's a liability. And software is the same. We should write less. Actually, I find that a lot of times problem that could be solved by talking or by an Excel sheet, there are so many and we don't, and we create software for it and we don't talk for it. So sometimes, sorry, I speak a lot of things, but yeah, so that's my view on
So
this.
I totally agree. And one of my criticisms of this obsession with LLMs and how they're going to make people more productive is it's more productive at producing code. As you say, code is a liability, so we can produce 10 times as much code. We've got 10 times as much liability now. Now, some of it will have value, not all of it. You've now got 10 times as much stuff to maintain, so we need to think through that carefully. The other thing I was going to point out there, from my perspective, is if we do a code review, so let's say somebody goes away on their own, writes 100 lines of code. What's a study that we produce on average 10 lines of code a day? So that's potentially quite a lot of work, the 100 lines of working code. By the time we inspect that and do a code review, all that work's been done. If we then look and go, but we haven't accounted for this requirement, so we're going to have to redo it, we're now throwing away all that work. Whereas if you're pair or mob programming, potentially you write that first line of code and somebody says, we've forgotten this condition. We've forgotten about this requirement. We're not just, we're saving the time of having to redo all that work because we're catching it much earlier. And it's that same thing about the earlier in the process we catch a defect or we
Shift
catch.
left, right? Shift left
Yeah.
approach.
Yes, exactly. So we touched on TDD a few times then.
Yeah.
Let's talk about TDD a little bit. What's been your experience of that?
Oh
What do you
yeah,
like or
that's
dislike?
that's a funny story. So actually, I consider myself quite lucky. Why? Because when I started my careers more than 10 years, so I'm not that old as it might seem. um, I joined a little software house in which they were doing TDD and pair programming. So I was like, oh, wow, that was something completely new to me. So therefore, I would say that, I grown up in the industry with the right seed in me. It was always, is there is a test, you know, are you doing micro commit? So, there is a CI. So actually, as I said, I'm quite lucky because, I started with TDD, with Jenkins, with Git, with JSON. I haven't seen all the things before, right? So my
You're
first
making me
experience,
jealous.
my first experience was like, oh wow, doing pair programming. So, but then obviously after this experience finished, I didn't quite get that. I worked as a consultant here and there, and I saw that the industry back then, so I'm talking about like 2014, 2015, 10 years ago, it was not like this. Like in consultancy, there was no practices at all. We were deploying software on a zip and give it to the administrator, like really horrible things, yeah. And I was like, no, I want to write tests. I want to, you know, back then I was more for TDD itself than per programming because the environment was completely wrong for it. So I didn't even advocate for pair programming back then. So, and I found really, if you see, my career history, you see that I worked 1 year here, 1 year there, and most of the time the reason why I made this jump after 1 year is because I didn't want to write code without test. I didn't want to just have some requirements from BAs and work straight on it. And that's actually it's funny because if you see my career, is this that allow me to be where I am today? Because I kept searching for this. I kept searching for places that they were having programming practices, and slowly, I moved, I found a company that they were doing this, and then this company sent me to the Netherlands, and then I've been there in Netherlands for many years, and then from Netherlands, when I was in Netherlands, I met Sandro Mancuso, and then I joined Codurance in London. So like all this journey has been driven by the fact that I wanted to write tests, that I wanted to do TDD. So that's a bit the story of my TDD. So, and then obviously when I joined in London, I start doing this constantly every day, every single day. So I remember that I was with a friend of mine, and I was all day per programming remotely, and the guy told me, "Do you work in a call center?" And I was no, because he was shocked that I was all day typing, talking all entire day. And I've done this for almost 5 years, every day, every day, every day. And now I cannot conceive, like recently happened to me to work with people that, they were not really into TDD because they didn't have the chance and they were trying to write code straight away. And I was feeling so uncomfortable, John. I was like, or when I've been doing this interview, lead code interview for the fang, where they give you a problem and you need to solve it straight away. I was like, and I said to this guy, okay, I know that we cannot write tests in this lead code, but I will work one behavior at a time because that's how I think software, one behavior at a time. I'm not able to take a problem and brrr. So yeah,
Yeah,
that's a
absolutely.
bit the story.
I'm the same. I like to take it one bit at a time and break it down. So you mentioned tests a lot there. What is it that draws you to tests? Because a lot of people argue that test-driven development isn't about the tests. So what's the particular appeal about tests and TDD for you?
For me, John, is the fact that whenever I need to create something, I'm going to tackle it one behavior at a time. And this allow myself to focus on something and have this something done. Obviously, sometimes, there are scenarios in which probably you are going to have more a big picture. So you are going to apply more outside in, right? So you're going to say, okay, the system needs to do this. Now let me go in the inside cycle, and then of course you go inside, then you go out, you go in, you go out. This B cycle of tests. So obviously sometimes it's more about the helicopter view of the system that is going to be in a red state for quite some time. Obviously, sometimes it's going to be just the inner circle of TDD. So obviously it's more localized. Yeah. So to me, it really happens my brain to tackle complexity because software is like an onion, right? So the more you peel it, the more, even if you tell me, Fabio, let's make a to-do list, if you want to do a to-do list, there is this complexity with it, right? And then let's apply this to big system. Like I worked in many times in enterprise situations, like in healthcare. I worked in banking. I work in government, where the complexity is a lot. Mostly is not technical complexity, it's the domain complexity. So, if you have a lot of domain complexity, the best way to tackle it, is with testing because you are sure that, okay, I have this behavior. Now I'm going to take care of it. And then I have this other behavior on top of it. You know what I mean? So like, so, and in a point, John, that nowadays, obviously I have experience with different technologies, but I've been doing mostly JVM, Java for more than 10 years. I've seen some C Sharp, I've seen some Go, but TypeScript in these last 6 months. The point is, I don't care anymore about the technologies because that's not the bottleneck. Because people don't understand that developers create software of what they understand. So if they don't understand properly domain knowledge, then the software will have problems, right? So, and that's why I'm also a fan of domain-driven development, right? Because it switched the focus from the technical implementation to the domain. Because if you don't understand the domain, you will not properly do software for it, right? So that's why TDD really helps me because I focus on the domain at first, don't care about the databases, nothing, just domains, talk to the people, stakeholder, what do you need, try to use an ubiquitous language, try to create a bounded context, yeah? And all this work has no technology in it, has no testing in it, it's just understanding. And then when you start the real part, okay, let's implement this behavior test. At least that's how I like to be helped by test. Yeah,
Yeah, I love that approach. I've said many times, and I've encountered a lot of software engineers that object to it, that we need to understand our domains. We need to actually acquire domain knowledge. And I was shocked the first time I worked in finance when I was sat in a team of people doing financial pricing. I was like, well, how do we price options? And I'm like, what's an option? Like, you need the domain knowledge. You can't just go to somebody and go, what formula do I put in here? Then you are reducing your skill set to a typist if you do that. We have to acquire that domain knowledge, and that's what makes us more valuable. And that's why it's crazy when we see these job specifications that list, you will know Python, Java, C Sharp, NoSQL, SQL, Docker, Kubernetes. Where's the domain knowledge? Where's the, you will understand insurance, or you will understand ERP, or that's so much more useful in many ways. You understand it, made apply it. I think there was something else I wanted to pick out there that you mentioned about TDD, and ask you if I've understood this correctly. In a way, it sounds like it's giving you small iterations and rapid feedback, and that small, quick wins, as I've described enough ways, where you're very, very quickly building some working software. Cool, yeah, and that's one of the things I like about it too, is that you can take a requirement, document it, write the test for it, now see it's working, and that incremental, that consistent feedback that you get, and it's, again, I think so valuable from a lot of agile things, those short feedback cycles.
definitely. Actually, I can tell you a nice story to tell to the listeners. So back in 2023, I was technical coaching a team of banking in Spain. So essentially, it was not the classic delivery job, right? When you join a team and I help them deliver, but it was more like, okay, let's go to this team, let's understand what problem they have, and then based on the problem they have, let's see what practices I can teach them and coach them on real code. So not like a training in a safe environment, but like coaching, but then applying those things, yeah, in a real in the bow in the business as usual code, yeah. And I remember because I want to touch on the point you made, that these guys, they were typically consultant, not even from the bank, that they inherited a software that was generated by some automatic tool that you draw something and then this tool generates the code. So you can imagine what type of spaghetti code they were dealing with, right? So these people were not owning their code. They have these big spaghetti things that they didn't even write. Every time it was very painful to touch here, touch there, super scared, blah blah blah. So then when I have seen this situation, I said, you know what, guys, let's forget for the moment TDD. Let's just coach these things, pair programming and refactoring techniques. And you will see that in no time we are going to get better. So what happened? Essentially, in this team, there was obviously functional people because, as you might know, in banking is it's even though they are changing, they're making an effort. There are still a lot of waterfall mindset, So, but in this team there were available some functional people. So, I was saying, okay, guys, can we organize sessions in which the developer can actually ask you what those things represent in the code, because they were like, if these domain knowledge banking things, then, but they didn't know what that means, right? So essentially, we have done a reverse engineering of this. We understood before what the domain was, yeah, and then I asked them, okay, now you see this if, please extract it in a method, extract the condition and put a good naming, like if the threshold for a payment is less than, yeah. So this little thing, just extracting if condition with the business knowledge, it changed everything. Yeah. So, and this, as you said, is just a proof that in the end, okay, technology, whatever, but if you don't know the domain, you are going to have a lot of pain. And in this case, again, there was no point in teaching TDD. Why? Because TDD is a practice that needs a lot of practicing. Yeah. So if I go in a team that doesn't know anything and I show them TDD, I'm not going to have short-term gains. It's very rare. It's a practice that will have long-term effect. Yeah, unless you go to a bunch of principal and senior people that they are very, like, with the right mindset, maybe they are able to straight away. But if you apply in a context where there are people that are not yet there, there is no point. So and yeah, that's just a proof that domain knowledge makes the difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And what you just mentioned on TDD there, as we were talking earlier, it's like guitar. If you just pick up the guitar and try and play it, you will suck, guaranteed, and it will hurt, and you'll get sore fingers, and you'll give up very quickly. If you want to learn the guitar, you've got to put in the reps. You've got to go there and learn some chords, learn some scales, listen to some music, try and play some music, and you will suck at it for various lengths of times, depending how good you are. Some of us will suck longer than others, but if you ever want to play something, you have to keep doing it. And all these techniques are the same. I mean, whatever programming language we learned first, we probably all sucked, but we got past that. If you want to learn TDD, you're probably going to suck for a bit and you need to learn it. I think you had an analogy to judo that you've used before. What's that?
Yeah, so essentially, I was talking with my dear friends that we are all in with the same mindset of about our profession, right? And we were discussing because one of them also is into martial arts, kung fu, karate. Yeah? So, and we were laughing at people that in LinkedIn very often, they say, nah, TDD, they are against. And they were giving me this example. It's like, if one day you are interested in karate, you then you say, okay, I'm going to the local dojo, you go there, you because you have read a book on karate, so you enter the dojo, you try to do some moves, they kick your ass and they say, no, no, karate is not for me. So that's the same, when I see people advocating against TDD or whatever, I, I always wonder, like, but do they ever tried it? And if so, how? With who? Very, very often, to be good at TDD, you cannot just buy a book, read the book, do some kata and finish. That's more than that. Like, my advice is to look for in-person coaching, like, or someone that use it, so to really see, because obviously it's for sure compared to don't read any book and don't do any kata, it's better to read a book and do katas, but that's not enough. You need to actually get coached and trained by someone that can gives you, like, okay, this is a pitfall, like, don't do that, or you know what I mean. So learning from other people, that's very important, because by yourself you can reach a point and then stop. And same is the guitar. I'm also a musician, as you know, and it's the same, like, at some point you need to practice with a band, right? Because it's all a different story. So
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. And the strange thing as well, I find that people that advocate against TDD, is setting aside the pair mod programming it. It's a personal process. We could work together on a team separately if we're not pair programming. I can do TDD. You can write your tests after. You can not write your tests at all. It doesn't matter what the rest of your team does. It doesn't matter what someone else does. So advocating against saying TDD is bad, don't do it, it is crazy, because if you don't want to do it and it doesn't work for you, I think you could benefit from learning why and learning more about it. But it still doesn't affect you if someone else on your team does it. Leave them be. If it works for them and they produce good software, that's the outcome that we want. If you can produce just as good software without it, that's fine too. But why the need to attack people that are doing it? It's a very strange mentality to me.
Yeah, well, typically I do this analogy. So if you know that when a surgeon goes into the room to operate someone, he needs to do a procedure of washing until here, to wash all the hands, the elbows, the arm, because there are bacteria that can infect. Yeah, but the surgeon is not going to ask, "Can I wash? Are you happy, patient, if I'm going to wash my hands before I operate you?" He's not going to ask. It's a practice that is there and he's going to do it every time. TDD is the same. Because I've seen a lot of people told me in the past, "Oh, but my manager doesn't want me to write test," or "My manager is creating Jira ticket for a test." No, TDD needs to become part of you, needs to become how you approach software. And it's not about your manager allow you to write TDD. You do TDD is just how you see the development process. So you will do it. I personally do it. Even if someone, and if someone is going to point me out, yeah, but you took more time because of it. Do you prefer to have bugs later? Or you prefer me to have taken a bit more time to do a proper job, right? So this is the analogy. It is a practice that even if your company doesn't advocate for it, even if your team, as you said, doesn't advocate for it, doesn't matter. That's your personal view on how you should do your profession, right? So there is no point in asking, because a lot of people, I'm sure you also face that, ask, "Oh yeah, but they don't allow me to write tests. There is no time." This is the typical thing I heard in my career. There is no time. We have no time.
Yeah, and I joined a startup in, should we say, 10 to 15 years ago, so as not to name the guilty. And in one of my first meetings, I had a junior engineer saying, John, you've never worked in startups before. You've no idea what this is like. We don't have time to do TDD and tests. Okay, fine. Well, I'm going to do them. And a week later, my software, my part of that project, was the only thing that was finished on time, done fully with TDD. Everyone else was late, and everyone else ended up being weeks late on stuff that was supposed to take a week. And after that, I ended up with that company for several years, and more people got converted. And that junior developer is now a staff engineer who pushes TDD. But again, the proof was in the pudding. Every time I've come to an organization where people told me, we don't have time for it, it takes too long, by writing tests and focusing on that, I've actually delivered quicker than most people. But the other thing that I see there a lot is people saying, we can't do TDD because we haven't got requirements. That might work in a perfect environment when you've got all the requirements up front. I've never worked in such an environment where we have all the requirements up front and they never change. I mean, that's why, again, I was so attracted to Agile and extreme programming, because the real world, the requirements change. What's been your experience of that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, one of the core principles, right, of extreme programming agile is that you have short feedback. You do something working and you adapt, right? So, as you say, it's unlikely. 3 years ago, I worked for an healthcare in US, and as you know, healthcare is very regulated, right? So, and we were kind of building up part of the software that was embracing a new format that this electronic medical record needs to possess. And therefore, there was a lot of work of the business side because that was also new for them. How we represent this domain that we already have, but we need to translate in a different format. Yeah, so for was also new for them. Yeah, and you cannot imagine how valuable it's been to be on call almost every day with them. So developer and business stakeholders, yeah. No BA in the middle, no project manager translating, no scrum master, just me and the business or the stakeholder discussing, looking, oh yeah, no, I think you made a mistake here. Are you sure you mean this? You cannot imagine how many bugs we have found in the documentation itself, that if we would have not had this chat, I was going to take the documentation and use it to write my test, because in that context we were writing some functional tests that were allowing in pure waterfall style the testers, instead of do them manually, at least have something automated, which was already a big thing, right? And they would have found all this bug after, while we prevented it because we were having three amigo session. So
Yeah, so without that, you'd have written software that worked perfectly to spec and was absolutely no use to anyone because the spec was wrong. Yeah, that's a great example, Fabio. Thank you. You mentioned refactoring as well a few minutes ago. Again, refactoring is something that I've written about on LinkedIn and has been one of the biggest sources of me getting flamed and abuse. When I say you don't need permission to refactor, it's something that you do. You go into a bit of code, there's a bit of mess, or you need to change it to make it a bit easier to test or to change it. Again, it's to my mind, it's a very personal activity. There's a catalogue of refactorings, and you may have developed a few of your own little techniques, but you go and apply them. You don't need permission. But the problem with this seems to be that people have taken these words, and now refactoring means throw away tens of thousands of lines of code and rewrite it as a big bang. What's been your experience with refactoring? What do you view it? And where do we draw the line between a refactor and a rewrite?
yeah, well, you touch a trigger point, because I'm a bit tired of hearing people using this word refactor, and they don't understand that there is no refactor without test. So talking about refactor, it's silly if you don't have test in place. Why? Because it's not a refactor, it's a restructuring. You change behavior. Tell me how you assert that the software is still behaving the same. It's impossible. You want to deploy manually, sure. You want to test manually, sure, but human mind, it's limited. So you cannot think about all the scenarios that can happen, right? So let's state it here for everyone watching. Refactoring without test doesn't exist. If you want to do refactor and you don't have test, then first things, take as a little part of code where you think there is some interesting behavior and harness it with a test. And then go refactor and then check if the test is green. If not, don't even do it. Talk about restructuring, talk about rewriting, but don't talk about refactoring. So this is point one. I guess the second part I wanted to say about refactoring is that IDE can already help a lot with basic things, inline variables, extract methods. And even though these things might seem quite silly and quite small, actually they have a big value, because we need to remember that code is for our colleagues, it's not for the computer. So if you have a code that is written if else while for, and someone, what was that? That's why, and also now my original point came back to my mind. Like you said, the line is this: sometimes I worked in teams where the word refactor was banned. No, don't talk about refactor, because the stakeholder doesn't want to hear it, because for them refactor, it means no value produced. This is the typical 99% of the industry. People, managers think, nah, no refactor. Is the software is going to behave differently? No, then no value in it. So, being a consultant, like I've done majority of my career, I learned that essentially you have assigned a task with your pair or whatever by yourself. So, my suggestion is this: get the domain knowledge, write your test, create the feature. Consciously introduce technical debt, which is okay as long as you are aware of it. Introduce code smell, fine, but you need to be aware of it. You need to have studied all of them and know it. Because if you do this consciously, yeah, and then deliver your task, and then allocate a percentage of time in refactoring, Why? Because in this way you still deliver something which is not perfect, but at least you consciously probably introduce some a small amount of technical debt, fine. But then, allow yourself to look back at that code the day after and say, oh, no, here this could be improved. Because this is obviously as a consultant what I needed to do in the past, because obviously otherwise as a developer, because this is also, John, a problem that sometimes, especially the developers that are only interested about technical things, that they don't have a holistic view, they don't think about helicopter view, oh yeah, I need to refactor this because this is bad. Sure, I understand your point, but you also need to understand that the meaning of software is not software itself, is to create value for customer, for business. So in a specific moment, you probably should not do refactoring because there's not the time for it. But and also doesn't work to have a separate backlog with improvements because probably guys 90% of the time no one is going to pick it up. My suggestion is to do this iteratively. So you know you do something, you deliver it, you introduce some technical debt, you are not an horrible developer, there is no problem, but then tackle it. As JB Reisenberg says, if you don't clean the garage, then it's a problem. Yeah. So we clean the kitchen every day, but we don't clean the garage, right? So if you don't clean the garage, then the garage is going to be a mess. It's bigger, right? So those techniques needs to be short, small, because obviously with a TDD cycle refactory, maybe you don't manage to do a big refactor, right? But that's okay. Yeah.
So, Fabio, last question, because we've slightly overrun and I've taken a lot of your time, for which I'm very grateful. It's been very enjoyable.
My pleasure.
What do you mean by technical debt there?
Okay, let's be short on that. So, as you all know, technical debt is a word that comes from Cunningham a long time ago in a specific context. Yeah. One suggestion I want to leave to the listeners is to go to reach for an article wrote by Alberto Brandolini, yeah, which is the Italian inventor of event storming techniques, which it rephrase the way we should look at technical debt, because you know technical debt is a debt with the mob, is not really a technical debt to the company itself. Because I think this terminology, it made sense back then in that context, but then used as a meaning to one to one every time that there are problem. I think it's not the case. So, and this article really, I really agree with this article that explains how we can look better and change and actually say, is this fit for the design? Is design fit the purpose? So I really, well, this is a long discussion, so I don't want to do it here, but please reach out to look this article. It's about how we can change our view on technical debt. Probably doesn't answer your question, but definitely I
No,
don't
I
have the
think
view the view that everyone has. That is something bad that we own to someone. No, it's.
I think that's a useful resource. I think the point I really wanted to highlight is it doesn't mean something that we don't like as a developer. It means something that's not contributing towards creating business value. Cool. Thank you very much for your time, Fabio.
My pleasure.
It's been a pleasure talking to you. Do you have any last things that you want to share with anyone that's listening that's found this interesting,
Right.
that might want to
Yeah.
reach out and discuss things further with you?
Sure. Thank you. Well, mental health, guys, is very important. So it is okay to don't be okay. So if you need help, it's free, obviously. Just reach out. I'm having a lot of people booking these 30 minutes mental health chat, and I think they're valuable for them, but also for me because I learn a lot from it. So feel free. There is a link of calendar in my LinkedIn. I'm available, and yeah, thank you very much, John, for having me. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.
Cool. Likewise, Fabio.